Thank you very much. I'm a homeschooling father of 3. I have 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls are 14 and 10, and the boy is 12. My wife and I have homeschooled our children from birth, and we have been advising homeschooling families around Kenya and within the East African and African region for the last 10 years. So first, to give you context, because Africa is very different. I am the second in my generation to have formal education. My father was the first one in our lineage to get formal education. And my wife and I were the first ones in our lineage to go to university. And the reason for that is because Kenya was a British colony. I became a British colony in 1920, and it's only just about 10 years later that we started getting formal education as a country. And that happens a lot. It happened a lot in sub-Saharan Africa. But my question is, was learning happening before that? And I would say yes, and emphatically so. But the difference is learning was integrated with life and a lot of coaching and mentoring. It was very, very organic. So in a sense, what the corona pandemic has done for the world is what colonialism did for us in 1920, because it just came and disrupted our style of learning, and we got ourselves into this. Now, for those who are in, for the audience who are in Africa, you can really relate with my story, because growing up, there was something called a report card, and it showed what you scored in math and science and English and everything. And at the end of every term, you'd bring it home and your dad would sit down and ask for your report card. And by watching your dad's facial expressions and body language, you'd be able to tell whether you performed well, thumbs up, or if it was a thumbs down. Now, the interesting thing is my dad always told me that he was number 1. But the problem is I knew many of his friends, and all his friends are also number 1. So I kept wondering, how many number 1s are there in that class? But looking back, I realized that just like my dad, every parent wanted an answer to what it means to raise solid, successful children. And that's informed by many things. It's informed by socialization, history, the kind of schooling and education we had, friends, influence. And now that I'm homeschooling 3 of my own, I also ask myself, what do I want at the end of my children's education? And I guess this is what everyone in the world wants. You want happy children. You want them to be safe. You want them to be comfortable. You want them, once they go out of the nest, to be able to hold a job and take care of themselves. Now, here in Africa, the answer to that question is you must give your children a good, solid educational foundation. Now, when you ask around, what does that educational foundation mean? As a result of this pandemic, we've been asked a lot by friends, by families. We've been called to radio stations and television stations to just talk about matters education. And I have always talked about 5 things that at the end of your children's education, they must have a healthy sense of self, that they can believe in their principles, even in the face of opposition. They can trust their own judgment. They can trust in their capacity to solve problems. At the end of their education, they must have a sense of personal competence, knowing that there is something they are good at, a skill and knowledge and expertise where they can go and have sustenance and take care of themselves. They must have what we call relational skills or soft skills or emotional intelligence, being able to read body language and facial expressions, so that wherever they go, they can be able to fit into that culture and even blossom in that context. They must have a sense of integrity, that my word is my bond, that when we agree on something, you can consider it done. What you see is what you get. And finally, unapologetically, part of what I call proper education is the fear of the Lord. Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So looking at all that and getting back to the question, how can we take advantage of COVID-19 to be able to infuse this? I mean, first you can see it's very clear when you look at schooling in its form and shape, you will struggle to get these deliverables, because I'm not talking about, you know, A material and geniuses in chemistry and physics. But how can we take advantage of this situation? The first one is, interestingly, as Mike Donnelly was saying, in Africa, 83% will not have access to resources like IT resources and laptops for distance learning. But for you to get a healthy sense of self, what do you need to do? You need to affirm your children with your words, verbatim. I mean, there's something psychologists call Pygmalion effect, the self-fulfilling prophecy, that if you tell your children you can do it, you have what it takes. It works for children, it works for employees in companies, it works for sports people. During Corona, it works. After all, you are in your house, there's nowhere else to go, just give them the affirming words. And the other interesting thing is, the best way to communicate security to your children as a man is to love your wife. Why? Because even research has shown that next to divorce, the most emotionally destabilizing occurrence that can ever happen in anyone's life is just death. And so this is a perfect opportunity to affirm your children by strengthening your relationships with your spouses. After all, we are in each other's faces, there's nowhere to go. We had better make the best of it. When you talk about personal competence, everyone and every parent has things that you can naturally teach your children. As you have said, I'm an outdoors guy. Hiking and camping is part of our staple and DNA. But during this Corona season, when we are on lockdown, we can go to the balcony at night and do stellar navigation, which for me is, I'm a subject matter expert. Look at the constellations that are familiar with us in the tropics, look at Orion, look at the Big Dipper, figure out where is true north, where is magnetic north, and in a very organic way, just teach my children what they know. Now, they have no idea this is supposed to be an MBA lesson. But guess what? It can be dressmaking, it can be crocheting, it can be baking, but every parent has something that you are good at that you can teach your children. That is how you give them competence. Secondly, this is a perfect opportunity to try out new things. You have never baked, try baking. If the bread is bad, it's okay. Tomorrow we are still here anyway. We'll bake another loaf of bread. And with time, you'll get to discover, even in life, 80% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. But guess what? Data has shown 94% of homeschoolers succeed in the first year. So if you can bake bread together, believe you me, you can do fractions together. And then thirdly, you can build competence by just reading wonderful books to the children. It's only 2 days ago that I got to realize that the book by C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, actually started as a radio series by the BBC during the Second World War. People were in their homes, there were bombs all over, and C.S. Lewis would go and read the series. And now, this is a perfect opportunity for you to read wonderful books with your children. I mean, right now as a family, we are reading Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Adichie, which talks about the civil war in Nigeria. And we are learning African history, post-colonial history, we're learning social anthropology. All these lessons are coming in a very organic way. And guess what? The children are loving it. And then on relational skills during this COVID pandemic, this is when to practice hospitality with your children. How do you set a table? How do you receive visitors? How do you have small talks with guests in your house? You know, this is everybody's chance to actually become an expert in developmental psychology. Forget Erik Erikson. This is practical psychology. It is here with us. Nature has put us in this context, and guess what? You can thrive as you do it. And when you talk about personal integrity, now the reality is integrity is not taught, it is caught. You know, you and I know children don't do what you tell them to do, they do what you do. So if you want them to read, read. If you want them to do math, do math. If you want them to pray, pray. And believe you me, if you want them to plonk themselves in front of the TV, you know exactly what to do. And finally, when you talk about the fear of the Lord, for me, this is a situation where we can discuss biblical extracts that speak into this season of our lives with our families and our children. For my family, what we have done is we've been discussing 1 Chronicles 12:32 about the men of Ishka who understood the signs of the times and knew what they had to do for Israel. And it's very interesting, even my 10-year-old understands that at some point, the cloud will move. The corona cloud is going to move. Who are going to be the men of Reuben who went in front of the tribes, and the men of Ishka who advised them. And behind them is the tribe of Zebulun who were able to resource that. What is that going to be in our context? So Bible is actually coming alive as we are sitting at home and just riding this pandemic through. And so those are practical ways we've been able to take advantage of that. Any family anywhere in the world can do that in their context and under their circumstances. And so this is it. So for us, it's warm. Regards from Kenya, the land straddled across the equator. And as Pumba and Timon would say, Hakuna Matata. Thank you very much.